Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I hope everybody is watching this with an open mind and um, listening with open ears to find out some education. What I'm going to cover in this video is the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, as it's written. Hold on, wasn't planning on reading it, so now I got to look at it real quick. All right, the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, the anti-Second Amendmenters, the gun grabbers, the liberals, Democrats, whatever you want to call them, they're all the same, have for quite a while related the militia comments to that's what the intention of the founding fathers was. It wasn't for that us average folks to have weapons. It was so that the people who were a part of the militia could have weapons. Really. Again, as when I spoke in my First Amendment post, in order to understand our Constitution, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, you need to research history. You need to research the writings of the founding fathers. You need to research both American history as to how things was at the time of the Constitution, pre-Civil War, Revolutionary War, as well as world history and how governments did things in other countries pre-Revolutionary War and during that time period. What I'm going to reference is, and I should have looked it up first, and I didn't, and I apologize for that, is a book called The Second Amendment, an Autobiography. If you Google that, then you'll be able to find out the right one. The author of this book is a former speechwriter for President Clinton. I come across this book, let's say maybe 3 years ago, at the local library here back home. And I saw the title and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. At the time, I think there was still a debate because this wasn't long after Sandy Hook. And so there were still debatings on the constitutional rights of the Second Amendment. And I think that's where that was the one time in that time period where the militia part was really being pushed by the left as meaning not average citizens, but only people for the militias. And when I saw the title, I got the book and I started reading the back cover about what it was about. And I started reading about the author. When I found out he had been a speechwriter for President Clinton, I went, oh, liberal, Democrat. Let me check this out and find out what his left-wing opinion of this is. The book is in 3 parts, 3 sections. The first section actually deals with the Bill of Rights, the ratification of the Constitution, and the ratification of the Bill of Rights. The second section deals with from the ratification for the first 150 years of our country and how the Second Amendment was enforced, viewed, dealt with in the nation, both as a whole and as it expanded out west. The third part deals specifically with the past 50, 60 years, which is where the real debates on the Second Amendment has been coming from. The second and third parts, the second part, he started showing his liberal leanings a little bit. And of course, he referenced Dodge City, where the one sheriff in Dodge City had banned all firearms because the place had become such a haven of criminality. And then his liberal leanings really come out strong in talking about over the past 50 years in how he believes the Second Amendment should be. But what I commend him for is the first section. He done a tremendous job in researching the writings of our founding fathers, actually the writings that they did during the Constitutional Convention, where they were actually writing the Constitution, and in the writings and the things they said about the Bill of Rights and the different ones. And in his descriptions of the writings of our founding fathers, it actually showed me that the founding fathers really intended for all of us to have weapons, which I already knew that because it was taught in school that the Second Amendment was put in there because of the tyrannical governments. Now, in the previous video where I was responding to some remarks from Facebook, I made comment about how the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, is based off of history and how foreign governments, the other governments in Europe and England, conducted things. The militias that were formed in those countries in them days was quite often used by the governments to subdue the citizenry, to enforce their laws upon the citizens in ways that was not conducive to freedom. What we have is freedom today. And that was the reason why the founding fathers put in there that we are to keep and bear arms. Their whole point was, and if you read the writings of the founding fathers, one of my favorite sayings is from Thomas Jefferson, where he says, if the government fears the people, you have liberty. When the people fear the government, you have tyranny. All right? The reason why the government fears the people is because we're armed. The American citizenry who owns firearms and is willing to defend our nation and our constitutional rights is tremendously larger than the military and all law enforcement combined. The government knows that there's no way they can force a socialistic, tyrannistic life on us. We won't allow it. They could never win. People say, well, the Second Amendment doesn't give you the right to own assault weapons. Well, in the previous video I explained there is no such thing as an assault weapon. But the military-looking weapons, yes, it does. Well, you're not supposed to own the same weapons that the government, that the military and police have. You don't have a need for it. Yes, we do, because they have them. If all we had was single-shot, bolt-action rifles, how do we defend against a military and a police that has fully automatic weapons, or semi-automatic weapons for that matter? We are outmanned and outgunned. That's why the Constitution, the Second Amendment, doesn't restrict what type of weapons. It doesn't say keep and bear arms except what the government don't want you to have shall not be infringed. Okay? Now, go into the basis of, and this is from the book, and I did some of my own research. If you read the writings of our founding fathers, George Washington said it, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin even made comments of weapons. Most of our founding fathers made comments about a well-armed citizenry. Not militia. Citizenry. Citizenry means all citizens. Also, if you refer back to the Militia Act of 1792, the Militia Act of 1792 actually required all citizens from like 18 to 45, I think it was, to own a firearm. It mandated that every person in the United States was to own a firearm. And people say, well, that was for the militia. All right, let's get into the militia part of it, okay? Because that's what everybody wants to keep doing. The militia part, and I learned this in the book, okay? And it really caught me that a liberal would come, but that's why I compliment him. Because he didn't fake the truth to get his point across. He actually wrote the truth. The reason why the militia part is in the Second Amendment is not for who's allowed to keep arms. After the Revolutionary War was over with, well, actually, let's go back to the beginning of the Revolutionary War. A lot of you, if you remember your history in school, and I don't know what they teach in history nowadays because I know a lot of it's being whitewashed for the liberals' agenda. But in school, I was taught that we almost lost the Revolutionary War before we even got started. And I was told part of it was due to the militias. Okay. Now, I don't remember how much of the militias we were talking about in school. That has been a few years, okay? But in his book, he reiterated about that. And what happened is the only military we really had at the time was the states had their own militias to defend themselves. Until we developed the colonial army, there was only the militias. Now, each state governed the rules of the militias. They had different ways of selecting officers. The officers had different ways of training their militias, and it was training to be for their own state to protect themselves. What happened was when the Revolutionary War kicked off, the Continental Army called up all the militias to join the army as one huge force to fight the British. Well, the problem is half of them didn't show up. Okay? When the fighting started, another half of those went home. All right? And that's part of what caused the almost losing the war. In addition to that, when the militias joined the Central Army, nobody knew what they were doing. Each militia was trained differently, so Massachusetts didn't know how to work alongside of Virginia because they had different training. They had different, tactics and strategies, and none of them could work with the Central Army. And that's what created a bunch of the problems and the confusion that almost cost us the Revolutionary War before we even got started. As George Washington, when he took over, was able to do, he was able to finally get the militias not only to become tactically equal with the Continental Army, he was able to gain more people into the militias and turn the war around. So after the war was over, once we had established the Constitution and had a standing central government, the government had sought the approval of the states to have a central standing army. And what the central government did was they wanted to mandate that all militias would be trained under the same premises as a standing army. For the purposes, if they was to ever have to be called to active duty, so to speak, then they could form into the Central Army and everybody would know what was going on. The layman's terms, the beginning of the Revolutionary War, the left hand didn't know what the right was doing. So they wanted to alleviate that for the future by having all the militias trained equally to the regular army. So New York militia would be trained exactly as the Pennsylvania militia, and they could work together, and it all would work out. The states had an apprehension about that due to the history in Europe of how the central governments had misused the militias against the people. The states were afraid that the central government, since they controlled the training of the militias, would use the militia against the states. And the Constitution gives the states the right of self-governance. Okay? So they balked at it. They went, we're not real happy with that idea. So in order to get the states to ratify the Bill of Rights, because in the Bill of Rights, the only thing that was in there was the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, it was worded slightly different, but that's basically all it was. And so, in order to satisfy the states, and to get the states to agree to the Bill of Rights and to ratify it, The government made a compromise. First of all, they told the states, if you allow the militias to be trained equally to the Army, so that we all know what we're doing together, you will still have sole control of appointments of officers. The military, the central government, will not appoint your officers or say who can be an officer in your militia. You can. We just want to have them all trained equally. And we will put in this in the Bill of Rights that the militias, we will guarantee you that the militias will stay under the control and authority of the states. They will be called up only in the case of a national emergency where we need them, such as the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812. If we are attacked, then we will need to call them up to help defend the country, and the states agree to that. So by putting in there a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. That's the purpose of that comment. Has nothing to do with individual rights to keep and bear arms. It's literally to guarantee to the states that the militias would stay under state control and authority. Therefore, they could not be used against the states by the central government. I found that rather astounding that a liberal would put that into his book, but he did. And I found that very interesting to learn and read about that, and to research some history and find out that's basically how it happened. But that's where the militia part of the Second Amendment comes. The rest of the Second Amendment, again, you need to read history. You need to go back and look at the Founding Fathers and what they say about firearms. And every last one of them write down that firearms must be, the citizenry must be allowed to keep weapons in order to protect themselves from a potential government. Now, we sit back today and say, oh, that's our government ain't going to do something like that. Really? Who says? I know some of this is going to make some of you liberals mad. But there's a recent president who, if he could figure out how to get back in power and take over the government, he would. It's the one who's refusing to step out of the limelight. I remember hearing back in 2012, shortly after he got reelected, Nancy Pelosi had actually addressed the idea of overturning the 25th Amendment that gave term limits to the president, so that at the end of his second term, Obama could run for a third. Now, I know a lot of you are going to go, oh, he said he didn't want a third term. Are you freaking joking me? Look at what he's done the past year since he got out of office. He trails President Trump around the world and consults with world leaders like he's still in charge. He's currently negotiating with Netflix to develop a program worldwide. It's a propaganda machine. If Obama could have stayed in the White House, we could say this: we need to be thankful to the Lord that President Roosevelt, FDR, was the president for 4 terms, 3.5. Because after he was reelected for his 4th term, he's the one that proposed the term limits on the president. If it wasn't for him, then we would have Obama trying to run this nation for the rest of his life. And I'm going to tell you right now, his total goal was to be a life dictator of this nation, to be the king of the United States. And I'm not saying this because I'm trying to be disparaging to Obama. Look at his actions, his words, his body movements. This is a man who wanted to be in power. That's all it was. It didn't have anything to do with trying to help the nation or anything. He wanted to be in power. And he had the charisma to turn people on his side, to make them think everything is sunshine and roses. Now, I'm not going to get more into that. That's for some other kind of thing. But I hope everybody learns something about our Second Amendment. You see, our Founding Fathers intended for us to have the same type of weapons the military had. Because over the course of the history of our nation, 80% of all the rifles and weapons the military has had were militarized versions of a civilian weapon. The first Continental Army, the first United States Army, after the Constitution and the formation of our central government, the government contacted the weapons manufacturers and bought the top of the line military weapons that the civilians owned. The great muskets that the civilians used to win the Revolutionary War with, those are the weapons that the government went to the manufacturer of those weapons and said, we want those to arm our army. There are a few weapons that's been made over the years specifically for the military. The Gatling gun, the Browning M250 caliber machine gun, missiles, TOW-2 missile, stuff like that. Those are things that are made, the tanks, artillery. Those are made specifically for the military. But for the rifles, the majority of the rifles, service rifles that the military uses, and even the pistols, the M9 Beretta, that 9mm that we used in the military since the mid-80s, that replaced the M1911 45. That was a civilian pistol. The military put forth we need to replace the 45. And so what they did was they researched the civilian pistols. They selected a certain number of those, tested them, and the Beretta 9mm was the one that won the test. So the military adapted it to become our service pistol. The M16, as I've said before, is that the AR-15 was developed in the 50s and advertised to the hunting community. And it is a great hunting rifle. It's accurate. It's not a lot of recoil. It's very easy for most people to use. Your standard, what we call hunting rifles, a lot of them are larger caliber, a lot of recoil, and they're not as easy for some people to use. The AR-15 was lightweight, had less recoil. A woman would enjoy shooting it and hunting with it. A kid, a 14, 15, 16-year-old kid would be able to easily use it to go out and hunt with, as well as a big burly guy. So it's a very versatile weapon as to the people who can use it. And that's what Armalite decided to do, is to develop something like that would appeal to a broader range of hunters and advertise that to the public. And in Vietnam, we had the M14 at the time, which is a full wooden stock, weapon that was heavy and cumbersome. And when you got into the jungle, now, most of you have never been to the jungle, and I've been through jungle warfare training. When you get into the jungle, a weapon who's heavy and cumbersome can become a real pain in the butt when you're trying to break trail through the jungle. And so they wanted a lighter weight, easier, more versatile weapon to use. And they come across the AR-15, and they tested it, and they liked it, so they caught a hold of them and said, hey, can we adapt this to a military? Make a few adjustments to make it a military weapon. Originally, the AR-15 M16 came with a 10 and 20 round magazine. Okay? The 10 round magazine is a straight stick magazine, barely sticks out of the magazine. Oh gosh, I forgot my nomenclature. Y'all folks in the Marine Corps want to kick my butt over this one. I'm sorry. Anyway, barely sticks out of the end of the weapon. The 20 round magazine is a straight stick magazine, and it's only a little slightly longer than the 10, and it sticks straight out as well. The 30 round had a slight banana shape to it, and it is a little bit longer than the other ones. We never decided to go anything above a 30 round magazine. The M229 SAW, squad automatic weapon, was developed strictly for the military. It's a fully automatic weapon. So But see, things like that, people don't understand. The saw's not legal for an average person to own. No fully automatic weapon is, and a semi-automatic weapon is about 80% of the weapons on the market. Rifles, shotguns, and it doesn't matter the caliber or how they look. A semi-automatic weapon will, no matter what it looks like, will do the exact same amount of damage as any other semi-automatic rifle. They say, well, but the AR-15 does so much damage. Well, you can take a semi-automatic 30-06 and do way more damage with it than a 5.56 round does. Okay? I should probably pull out of the closet a 5.56 round and a 30-06. 30-06 and the 7.62 millimeter rounds are about the same. The 5.56 rounds in the M16 in the AR-15. And actually, I got to correct something here. The weapons that's been used recently are not AR-15s. They're actually the M4 version. The AR-15 has a solid stock and longer handguards. Okay? The M4 has the shorter handguards. I heard some liberal refer to them as barrel shrouds. Okay? And a collapsible stock. Now, the collapsible stock, and the reason why the M4 has become more popular, is that collapsible stock makes it easier for smaller frame people to use the weapon. The full size stock is about this long. Okay? Around about 12, 14 inches. So, I've seen many videos on YouTube watching people, girls especially, but put it in their shoulder and they're like this, holding it like this. The eyes, because bringing it up like this, the stock in your shoulder has the rear sight too far away from your face. You can't bring your face all the way up to it. And so with the collapsible stock, you can collapse the stock down where you can bring the weapon up, bring your face up, eye closer up to the rear side aperture. And that's part of the reason why it's popular. It became more popular. Is because it's easier to use. And again, it's just nothing more than a semi-automatic weapon. A 22 semi-automatic rifle, you could do the same damage with it as you can an AR-15. Okay? So, does the Constitution give me the right to own a semi-automatic weapon? Yes. Does it give me the right to own high-capacity magazines? Yes. Because this is equal to what the military has. That's the whole point of our constitutional right, is that I have the same right to have the same type of weapon that the military would use against me if our government decided to overthrow us. Okay? The Second Amendment is so that we can defend our right, not against the government. It wasn't necessarily to defend us against criminals, to protect our household against break-ins, and it dang sure wasn't in case Bambi decided to revolt. It was meant so that we could protect ourselves from a government that would try to subjugate us. Okay? Learn, research. Now, the gun grabbers, anti-gun people are not going to, they're just going to, but anyway, circulate this video. Tell your friends, all right? We need in Washington, we need people who are us, who stand up for our constitutional rights. I'm running for the Senate for that purpose, because today is when we need them in there. We don't need them 4 years from now, 6 years from now. We need those people in here today. Vote for me. Share my Facebook page. Like my Facebook page. More importantly, follow me so when I post new stuff, you can keep up. But tell your friends. Share this video with all your friends. All right? Thank you for watching, and y'all have a nice night.